Hello, everybody. My name is Tim Garner, and this is week 2 of our overview of the Book of Deuteronomy. We've got a lot of ground to cover, as always, so let's get started. Let me share my screen. And over there. So, as usual, the core idea is hear, hearken, listen. What we call the Shema, that's the actual term, from what I understand. It's translated that way so many times throughout the book. And as you probably figured out, we will cover quite a few of the verses, but this is not going to be a verse-by-verse study. I'll just try to give you enough that you can sink your teeth into when you do your own study and your own reading. So here's the outline of the book that we've been talking about with what could be considered 4 sermons or speeches. And the first one that we'll look at this week is a retrospective. That's a look back to what God has done in chapters 1 through 4. So here's Calvin, who's just had the bright idea of tossing a water balloon up in the air, and he's running to get under it to catch it. And as you might imagine, whoosh or sploosh, splatter. It splatters on his head, soaks him with water, and this is his response. How can something seem so plausible at the time and so idiotic in retrospect? Well, this is kind of a humorous description of the way that the children of Israel were learning. They were learning by doing. They were growing from failure. They were maturing by making mistakes as they transitioned from the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, the training, really, in the wilderness, preparing to enter the land of promise and begin the time of conquest. So here's another outline, a little bit different perspective, with 3 basic speeches in the book. And we'll see later that the core of this first speech has to do with basically the geography that the children of Israel covered. But it has 3 basic parts. It reminds them of what God has done for them. It reminds them of what he expects of them. And finally, he reminds them or teaches them what he's promised to do for them. It's historical, legal, and prophetic perspective. It's kind of a different analysis. This, by the way, comes from Nelson's Bible Dictionary. So if we want to understand many of the basic messages of Deuteronomy, we want to analyze some of the key terms. So as we look at terms that are used most often, obviously, as we've said, hear or hearken, listen, at least 90 different times that term appears. Other terms, observe, closely related to hearing. And we'll see other terms, keep, 40 times, obey, 29 times, shall do or shall not do, very legal sounding, technical sounding idea, 88 times. And then command also, 40 different times. Commands, commandments, that kind of thing. But there is a heart and a soul to Deuteronomy, 46 times. And oftentimes, together, the terms heart and soul are used numerous times in the Book of Deuteronomy. The concept of hearing, learning, observing is so pervasive, as we'll see as we get into it. But what we have to understand is that Deuteronomy is a brass tacks book. Supposedly, the history of the idea of brass tacks comes from the decorations. Sometimes they were silver, as in, for example, the case of the casket of Abraham Lincoln. Very fancy, nice, festooned with silver tacks, but typically workaday people, best they could hope for was brass tacks. And supposedly, according to this quote from this paper in 1863 in Houston, Texas, they were referred to. And typically the term is used to refer to bedrock, basic, fundamental, very important issues. So brass tacks, yes. But brass tacks hearing is not only a brass tacks issue for the Old Testament, the Israelites, but it's also for us. Hearing is fundamental. It's the beginning. Faith comes from hearing, and hearing by the word of Christ. Someone somewhere was kind enough to teach us the gospel, to teach us the good news of Jesus. We heard it, and if we really heard it, we responded to it. We'll get into that in just a second. So here's examples from the first 4 chapters of this idea. Hear the cases between your fellow countrymen. Judge righteously between a man and his fellow countrymen. You shall hear the small and great alike. You shall not fear man. If there's a hard case, bring it to me. Bring it to Moses, it says. Goes on and says, in reference to how the people would respond to them, this day I will begin to put the dread and fear of you upon the peoples everywhere in the heavens, who when they hear the report of you, see, they're going to learn too. They're going to be afraid because of the things that they hear about the children of Israel. Hearing is fundamental, as we say. It's the beginning. And when we talk about hearing in regard to humans and their spiritual development, their intellectual development, it's fundamental to humanity. It's one of the things that separates us. Hearing, language, understanding, it's what separates us from almost every other aspect of God's creation. And here's some other examples. Keep and do them, talking about God's commands, for that is your wisdom and understanding in the sight of all the peoples who will hear all these statutes and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. Many, many more examples. Assemble the people to me that I may let them hear my words, so they may learn to fear me all the days they live on the earth, that they may teach their children. Chapter 4, verse 36, out of the heavens he will let you hear his voice. Right? Hear his voice to discipline you. And on earth he let you see his great power, and you heard his words from the midst of the fire. And then we begin to see here kind of a segue or a connection between hearing and obeying. They're bound together. And as we look at, kind of analyze this idea, especially as we look across other versions, this passage where we see the term, we're supposed to listen to God's voice when we return to him. That's translated as obey or obedient in other versions. In this passage, it says, if you listen to the commands, you'll be blessed. If you do not listen to the commandments of the Lord, you will be cursed. On other versions, also, those ideas, you listen or you do not listen, or if you obey or you do not obey. Same idea. And of course, this is not just Old Testament. This is intrinsic. The idea of hearing, who do you listen to, is intrinsic to obedience in the New Testament. In fact, in 1 Peter 3, verse 6, it says, in a very brass tacks fashion, that Sarah obeyed Abraham. What it really says is that she heard him. She listened to him first. That's what that idea that's conveyed there means. What else? Hearing and obeying. In reference to prophets. If a prophet even prophesied accurately, but then tried to lead you astray, we were not to hear. We were not to listen to him. We were not to obey him. But as far as who we should follow the Lord our God and fear him and keep his commandments, listen to his voice, serve him, and cling to him. Again, in other translations, this term listen comes through as obey. What else? So do. Very, very powerful term right here. You shall do. You shall do to him. That's observation. Same thing you did to Sihon, king of the Amorites. Also, the Lord shall do to all the kingdoms into which you're about to cross. What else? Keep. We don't add to or take away from the Lord's word. We just simply hear and keep the commandments of the Lord. We keep and we do them. As we saw earlier, the people will say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. Why? Because they keep and do the commandments of the Lord. And here we see, give heed to yourself and keep your soul diligently, lest you forget the things which your eyes have seen, and lest they depart from your heart all the days of your life. But make them known to your sons and daughters, your sons and your grandsons. So you shall keep the statutes and his commandments which I am giving you today, that it may go well with you and with your children after you, and that you may live longer in the land which the Lord your God is giving you. And then here we see other examples of heart and soul. Heart and soul were basically almost always joined at the hip, or sort of grammatical cousins. Keep your soul diligently. Don't let these things depart from your heart. Search, but from there you will seek the Lord your God. That's when they're in exile. You seek the Lord your God, and you will find him if you search for him with all your heart and your soul. Know therefore today, and take it to your heart, that the Lord, he is God in heaven above and in the earth below. There is no other. It's a very spiritual or emotional aspect. Of course, basically the geography that we talked about that they covered in Deuteronomy chapter 1 through 4. Chapter 1, they went from Mount Sinai to Kadesh Barnea, as we saw, or we'll see in the map in just a moment. And then also from Kadesh Barnea to the kingdom of Heshbon, where they defeated King Sihon, and then from there to the plains of Moab, just east of the Jordan. And then there, in that month that we talked about earlier, when Deuteronomy was delivered, they're being exhorted and prepared to hear the second giving of the law. So here's a map where you can see they left Egypt, they went to Mount Sinai, eventually they'll make their way up to Kadesh Barnea, and then make their way around and up to the point where they're ready to enter the land of Canaan. In the course of that, of course, they defeat the King Sihon, one of the kings of the Amorites. And here we see basically a layout without a lot of lines and squiggles. The kingdom of Sihon, and then also the kingdom of Bashan. They defeated east of the Jordan. This is before conquest, basically. And these are probably the battles that the people in Jericho and other places in Canaan would have heard about that caused them to be in such fear. So what do we learn in Deuteronomy 1? Understand and convey the Lord's commands. Moses spoke to the children of Israel according to all that the Lord had commanded him to give to them. What else? Go in the direction that the Lord gives us. Example, verse 6, you've stayed long enough in this mountain. Turn and set your journey. Go in the Lord's direction. Turn and set your journey. And these people were ready for that one. They were, in fact, willing to follow God's direction. So God's judgments are righteous and fair. He talks about, you shall not show partiality in judgment. You'll hear the small and great alike. You won't fear the condemnation of man because it's God's judgment that you're meting out. Don't rebel or murmur against the Lord's command, which they've done so many times, as he gives the example of, where they fell into their woe is me mentality. The Lord led us out of Egypt to bring us out into the desert because he hates us, that kind of thing. And then don't do anything to discourage or frighten our brothers into disbelief or disobedience. Saying things like, the people are taller than we, the cities are large and fortified to heaven, and besides, we saw the sons of the Anakim there. Then I said to you, do not be shocked or fear them. That's what Moses, Joshua, Caleb, and others were trying to say, that the Lord would fight for them and they could win. Other lessons from Deuteronomy 1, the Lord carries us when we can't walk on our own. There are so many things that the children of Israel didn't have, and the Lord took care of them. He carried them as a father carries his son. The other thing is rewards are given to those who wholly follow the Lord. Caleb, of course, was given a choice. Faithful Caleb was given a choice of where he could live in the land. He chose, of course, Hebron, the mountain with the tallest of the tall. and the biggest of the giants. We're supposed to encourage our leaders. And this is a powerful term. This term that's described as encourage, it appears over in Leviticus chapter 25, verse 35, in reference to the Israelites taking care of their poorer brothers. They were to sustain them, to help them, to support them. That meant not just moral encouragement, but not moral support, but also material support, to literally help them in very, very solid material and sustained ways. What else? The sin of presumption. Numbers 14. They went up heedlessly to the ridge of the hill country, neither the ark of the covenant of the Lord nor Moses left the camp. They just decided that since they had brought back a new report, that they would take matters into their own hands and try to take the land on their own. But God was not on their side, because he's not on the side of sinners. He said, I am not among you. I am not in your midst. So we must journey through life at God's order and with God's direction. So basically, their life at this point and throughout the period of conquest with Joshua and Caleb would be cross this river, camp in that valley, fight this battle, do not fight this battle, go and take that city, go and don't take that city, do specific things when you take the city. Basically, they had learned that they had to trust their commander, follow their instructions, believe in God. Believe in God. Those are all very, very closely related. Also, from Deuteronomy 2, we learn, when we do our part, the Lord will provide all we need in our journey. Chapter 8, verse 4, your clothing did not wear out on you all 40 years, nor did your foot swell these 40 years. The Lord hardens hearts on occasion, or by allowing on occasion one to harden their own heart, like King Solomon in chapter 2, verse 30. Numerous examples in the book of Exodus where the Pharaoh hardens them after each and every miracle that God brought. And remember, there is no battle too great to win when the Lord is on our side. Quote, there was no city that was too high for us. The Lord our God delivered all over to us. Deuteronomy 3, the Lord fights for his people. How does he fight for his people? Today, I don't know exactly. I just know that I am where I am, and most of us are, especially as mature Christians. We know that we are where we are because a lot of times the Lord, in some way, shape, or form, fought battles for us. No one can do what God can do. Chapter 3, verse 24. One version, the English Standard Version, says there, you have only begun to show your servant your great works. But this is in light of all of the great things that God has, in fact, done for Moses and these other servants. God does not always answer our prayers with a yes. Sometimes it's, I've heard enough. I've made up my mind. And we're left with that. And remember, always, 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 leaders need encouragement and strengthening and support. Chapter 4, see that you do all I command you. Do not add to it or take away from it. Proverbs 30, that's Deuteronomy 12, verse 32. Proverbs 30, verse 5 and 6. Every word of God is tested. He is a shield to those who take refuge in him. Do not add to his words, or he will reprove you, and you will be proved a liar. We obey all the commands that God gives us, and only those commands. We don't add to or take from. Keep it simple, keep it simple, keep it simple. Numbers 25, verse 3 through 5. Those who follow the world into idolatry and sin will be punished, and those that cling to the Lord will be rewarded. God was so angry that sometimes Numbers 25 indicates that when these people involved themselves with the worship of Baal Peor, he killed them. He executed them, had them executed. Very, very extreme. But it was a very, very horrific Canaanite, pagan idolatry that they had allied themselves with. What else? Greatness comes by following a great God and his great law. For what great nation is there that has a God so near to it as is the Lord our God whenever we call on him? Keep God's word before you at all times. Do not forget your experiences with the Lord or forget his words, his commandments. Bottom line, remember what God has done for us. Remember what God has done for us. Everybody have a great rest of the week. Grace and blessing, grace and peace to all of you. Goodbye.